Well, a hearty shalom to you. Jeffrey Seif here, and let me wish you a happy Hanukkah. That might sound like an odd greeting for something that principally is going to be distributed amongst Christian people. And one might ask, what does that have to do with us? Well, to begin, I want to teach a bit here on Hanukkah, but let me begin with the familiar and then build from it. If you look in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, I'm looking here in the Bible, verse 22, we're told it was wintertime and Jesus was in the temple in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. Jesus was a Jew, the disciples were Jewish. The story took place in Judea. Jesus' name was Yeshua, which was Hebrew. He was born in Bethlehem, not Bethlehem. His mother's name was Mariam, not Mary or the Virgin Mary. Language has been Catholicized and Anglicized. You strip it all back. What you're looking at is a Jewish story when you're looking at Jesus. And in the Johannine Gospel, particularly, we're told that Jesus is in Jerusalem celebrating the Feast of Dedication. Now, the Feast of Dedication in the Hebrew is known as Hanukkah. So there's the connection. You might say, well, I never knew that before. Learn something new. Of course, most people kind of sort of know Jesus was Jewish and the story took place in Judea, but are not savvy on the particulars associated with that. Well, the kind of person that would be interested in a Bible teacher like me wants to look at the good news through the eyes of the Jews. So there it is. What I want to do with this brief piece is speak to you to, for, and about Hanukkah. What is it? Or why is it? Individuals know that Hanukkah is a feast that Jewish people celebrate, or the Jewish version of Christmas. And by the way, there is something to be said for that. But if you look around in the Bible for Hanukkah, this famous Jewish holiday, it's only found in the New Testament, not the Old Testament, which is interesting at face value. The Hanukkah story is not Mosaic, unlike the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Pentecost from the Greek, known as Shavuot in the Hebrew. These feasts that a lot of Bible students feast on because they're so thrilled to see how these important celebrations in the Older Testament can be seen to mirror the Newer Testament. When you look at Old Testament celebrations, these are derived from the Law of Moses, and there is no Hanukkah there. And the reason why there's no Hanukkah there is because the story of Hanukkah took place many, many, many centuries after Moses, well over 1,000 years and centuries added to it afterward. In fact, the Hanukkah story not only does not have origins in Moses, it doesn't have origins in the Old Testament, because the Hanukkah story took place after the close of the Old Testament. The Old Testament comes to a close in the days of Ezra, Nehemiah, during the prophetic administrations of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Judea has been annexed as a Persian holding. It's a small, relatively insignificant colony that really is superintended by the Persians. The colony itself exists at the largesse of the Persians. The Persians allowed the Jews who had been vanquished in the days of the Babylonians to return to Judea and begin rebuilding their lives and rebuilding their temples. And they did. And the Old Testament comes to a close, and in the days of Nehemiah and those prophets, where the temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy House, was just built. And the Old Testament comes to a close with Jews having secured something of a toehold in the Persian Empire. And that's the end of the Old Testament. But that's not the end of history. What happens? We're stepping beyond the Old Testament now. You might be somewhat familiar with a character named Alexander, Alexander the Great. His father Philip was king of Macedonia, what we call northern Greece. When Alexander took the helm in the wake of his father's death, he exacted the vengeance of the Greeks against the Persians. And he, with verve, went eastward, and he had just overwhelmed the Persians and established a Greek Hellenistic empire that extended not just from Greece now, but extended all the way east as far as India, into northern Africa as well. The world, in so many ways, under Alexander was Grecianized, but Alexander dies. Well, all men die. He died young, unexpectedly. It was rather tragic, by the way, for all the fights he was in as a warrior. What finally killed him wasn't a sword or a spear, it was a mosquito. It's not a glorious death. He picked up a disease and died without leaving an heir that could step in and lead this vast enterprise. So what happens is the realm that he had conquered was divided up amongst his various generals. One named Seleucus out of Syria has that region. And another one of note for our purposes here, Ptolemy's, is situated in Egypt, North Africa. And of course, Judea is sandwiched in between those worlds and gets kind of jostled back and forth between them. If you look at the succession from Seleucus, you have various power brokers that came to the helm. And by the time you're in the 2nd century AD, the Greeks, Antiochus is his name, called Epiphanes. He superintends Judea, and he just doesn't like Jews, doesn't like Judaism. It's an age-old story, isn't it? And he decrees that the Jews in his realm cannot keep kosher. They got to eat swine. They can't circumcise their boys. They can't keep the Sabbath. They can't read the Torah. I mean, he just looks to remove a Jewish worldview, just does not want it in his culture. There's something spiritual in the way there's a disdain for Jews. Now, there's philo-Judaism as well. There are Christian people that love Jews and Judaism, but don't understand it. Conversely, there are those that just hate it. They don't even understand why. They just do. Well, Antiochus was hell-bent on destroying the Jews. And he not only prohibited that which I just described, but in addition to that, what he does is he goes into the temple complex in Judea. You know, that temple was reconstructed at the end of the Old Testament. And he drives out Jehovah worship. He goes into the holy place and dedicates it to pagan deities, and they offer swine's flesh in there. The Beit HaMikdash, the holy house, becomes rather unholy. What do you think? And that and other insults were imposed upon the Hebrews. Well, there was fermenting discontent, but the Greek Syrians were so strong and the Hebrews were so unorganized and weak. What happens? There's a fellow named Matthias, who leads a revolt, in effect. Some Syrian Greek soldiers came to his town, Modin, and they set up these ceremonies where they bring out the elders and make them sacrifice swine to deity. So he was given the sword to kill the swine, but instead he decided to kill the soldier. I'm not glorifying anybody's death, but he plunges that sword into that soldier. He pulls it out and he says, "Whoever is for God, follow me." He sparks a revolt. The net result is, the grass was dry and tall. It was hot. There was a gentle breeze, and there's a child in the field playing with matches. Well, I'm only using that as an analogy. In other words, I just described a situation where all the details are there for a perfect storm. Child, light the match, start a fire, great inferno. Well, what happened is Mattathias' expression of zeal was the match that lit the fire. And all of a sudden, anyone who was discontented with the Greek Syrians got behind And now you have a militia, you have army, people that are fighting for homeland, fighting for religion, and people that are fighting with those energies are going to fight with more verve than soldiers that are just conscripted to attend to a duty somewhere. They've got nothing in it personally. Well, truth be known, that there was less of a presence, a Syrian presence in Judea at the time, because as I've mentioned at the outset of this, there were tensions between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. They're fighting, and energies were invested by Antiochus in an Egyptian campaign. So what was left in Judea was something of a skeleton force. Well, all the forces are there. It ignites, and there's a revolt. And what happens is the Maccabees, is what they were called, are going to be successful in throwing off the Syrians in Judea. They're going to retake the capital city, Jerusalem. They're going to retake the temple complex. They're going to drive out all that pagan stuff, cleanse it, and rededicate the temple for Jehovah worship. Now, that's where you get the word Hanukkah from, dedication or rededication. You might say, well, Seif, how do you know all these things? I mean, I'm 70 years old. I wasn't around back then. We're looking in the 2nd century BC. How do I know it? Well, I wasn't there, but I have literature that was. Now, it might disturb you to hear a Bible teacher quote from a non-biblical source. I don't look at apocryphal literature as inspired as I do biblical literature. The word inspired comes from inspiritus. The argument with biblical literature is engagement with it inspires something spiritual. I mean, I think that the Apocrypha has inspirational content, but not in that classical sense of Holy Spirit driven. But it's inspirational in that it takes you into bygone eras, and you can see the way people act. And it tells the story of these inspired Maccabees who were game to roll the dice against the vagaries, against the uncertainties of the future, out of a zeal for God, and see what can be accomplished. And there's a story. Well, there's a saying, by the way, with the story. Nesgadol Hoyashem, a great miracle happened there. What happened, not only was it adjudged miraculous, or at least fortuitous, that the Maccabees and the Judeans threw off the Greco-Syrians. Fortuitous, miraculous, call it what you will. But for the temple rededication, it took oil for the dedication that would take a little over a week. And they only had enough oil for one day. And what happened, it sufficed. It spread out. Just like Jesus could take bread a little bit and spread it out amongst thousands. What you have here is a story of just a little bit that it spreads out. It's a great miracle. Well, Jesus in the Newer Testament, in John chapter 10, verse 22, he's there in Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Dedication. Now, what he celebrated, as I noted just prior, was not inaugurated in the Torah, in the law of Moses. Not only did it not start at the beginning of the law of Moses, the beginning of the Old Testament, but when you go through the Old Testament, you don't see any Hanukkah. You don't see it in the Old Testament. You don't see it till the inter-testamental era. That is the period between the testaments. And apocryphal literature gives a window into, events, philosophies, histories, mythologies that existed in the intertestamental period. Now, it's not inspired in the sense of canonical biblical literature, but it's inspiring in the sense that you can see people at work driven by certain energies. Just like for me, by the way, when I look at certain movies, I'm inspired by them. When I watch football games, sometimes, my team is behind at halftime, but then they go in and then they come out and take the field the second half, and it's like a new team. That inspires me. It lets me know it's never over till it's over. I like to see examples of struggle, success stories. I like movies to that effect. That's why I like the old Rocky movie, Rocky Balboa, if you remember that, or The Last of the Mohicans, or um, The Patriot. There's different movies. Of course, I'm dating myself with this stuff, but you're looking at, military movies where militia gathered together against all odds and threw off a force much greater. That stuff inspires me. It kind of makes it happen. Well, when I look at apocryphal literature, occasionally I run into that, and I certainly do here in this story. In the first book of Maccabees, in the 4th chapter, you have the story of Hanukkah, and we're told here in 54 that the Gentiles profaned the sanctuary, but now it was dedicated with songs and harps and flutes and cymbals, and all the people fell on their faces in worship and blessed heaven who had prospered them. They celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness. We're told in verse 57, they decorated the temple, etc. It was a big to-do. And then in verse 59, now verses. Wait a minute, you're making it sound like the Bible, brother. Well, when the Bible was first written, there were no verses or chapters. That stuff was imposed by editors. And it's like this with the apocryphal literature. If I say, well, look in chapter 4, verse 59, in so doing, I'm not trying to make it sound like a Bible. The Bible that you read never had that. But once you have the printing press and you can have lots of pages in a book, then you have books named and then chapters and verse designations. So that way we can direct our energies and direct people to specific places. And here in 59, we're told Judas, who was a leader of this revolutionary enterprise, and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season, the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed with gladness and joy for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Kislev. That doesn't sound like I know January, February, March, April, etc., December. I ain't never heard of Kislev. Okay, well, look, the months that we have, bear Roman, marks. August. You ever heard of Augustinian? July. You ever heard of Julius? Julius Caesar. Ring a bell. That we're kind of working with a stamp on time that came later. And if you go into the Hebrew Bible, there's different months. And it just so happens, if you correlate, if you wonder, where is Kislev proximate to the way English folk do time, it's there in mid to late December. So that's when Hanukkah is. Now, what happened, if you were to raise the question, why did this non-Mosaic holiday become so prominent in the Jewish world? Certainly, the Old Testament sets out a holiday scheme, and Hanukkah wasn't in it. So they existed for centuries without a Hanukkah. But then the story comes along, and it seems to eclipse all the others. And it doesn't even have any roots in the law of Moses. We're told here that certain Hebrews, Judas and others, not to be confused with Judas Iscariot. It was just Judah. Judah is a reasonably common name. It's like Jeff or Sam. In any case, so you have principles in this revolution that are so excited about the miracle of it that there's a celebration that they mandate for 8 days, and it takes on. And what it is you go out a little, 160 years from then, and then there's Jesus celebrating Hanukkah. You see him there in John chapter 10, verse 22, as I noted. So it's there, and Hanukkah existed in the Jewish world and the Jewish psyche, but it was never considered historically to be a major event like it is now. Judaism propped up Hanukkah in recent days beyond what it was historically. Well, why did they do that, Jeffrey? I'll tell you why. Because of Christmas. What do you mean by that, Seif? Well, Jews live in this broader culture. And little Jewish boys and girls grow up, and kids aren't stupid. Come Christmas time, the world changes. You know, props are set up on buildings and in yards and to illuminate. There's special music, special food, special festivities, and something that kiddos are very keen on: gift giving. So what happens is Christianity becomes rather attractive to children. Hey, look what Johnny got, a new bicycle or this or that. Look, it's, so the rabbis have a crisis because now you have kiddos wanting to become Christians because there's a moment that's all about them in so many ways, or just really speaks to them in so many ways. Well, the rabbis got together and they scratched their head. Well, what do we have proximate to Christmas? We have Hanukkah. So what happens is, while Christmas is a day of giving gifts for one day, Judaism's sages, in their wisdom, found a holiday proximate to that and made it a day, not a day, but made it 8 days of gift giving, a gift on every one of those 8 days. So instead of the Jewish kids coming home and saying, Mommy, I want to become a Christian, they have Christmas gifts. I figured, let the Christians go home and say, Mommy, I want to become Jews. They get them for 8 days. You're saying, Jeffrey, that's cute, but is it real? Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. But, I thought you'd find that interesting, but it's not the principal point that I want to leave you with when considering Hanukkah. It's just an interesting point. Now, what I want to leave you with, and by the way, thanks for going with me on this journey. What I want to leave you with is the fact that we're at a time when certain regnant powers are looking to stamp out Judaism, stamp out Jewish religious experience, stamp out Jewish presence in the Holy Land. Stamp it out, stomp it out. And it looks like Jewish presence was somewhere between going, and gone. But then there was a fortuitous turn of events. And lo and behold, the tide turned, and then Jewish presence in the land reasserted itself. Now, historically, we're looking at events that took place in the 2nd century BC. Today, when you look at Israel, well, there's tensions, there's Arabs and Jews, and the Arabs, this is our land, and the Jews don't have the right to be there, stomp it out, and all that. Muhammad, you're looking at Hanukkah that took place, 164 BC or thereabouts, before Christ. If you look at Islam, if you look at Muhammad, he wasn't born till 570 AD. He's not even going to come out of his mother's womb till approximately 750 years later. Never mind the religion eventually starting in 610 AD when he claims to have revelation, and then galvanizing in 640 AD. He dies. And then his lieutenants, by dint of determination with the sword, expand up into Judea, Byzantium, North Africa, by dint of determination with the sword, and make an Islamic presence with the claim, this is our land now, we've taken it from you. So you have the debate now, well, listen, the Muslims, this is their land, etc. But before there was any of that, there's a story here during the inter-testamental period between the testaments where Syrians, now these are not to be confused with Syrians that we know today. These were Greeks up in Syria. And there is this deliberate attempt to destroy everything and anything Jewish in Judea. And there's this pushback. There's this miracle. There's this lighting the temple, keeping the flame alive. And what I want to leave you with is we see that same sort of thing happening today, don't we? We really do. Where there's a great miracle that happened there. Just that that Jews survive, quite frankly. There's a Jewish expression, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. And that's the Jewish people live despite the attempts to snuff us out all the time. Well, there's Hanukkah. Thank you for allowing me to give you a little telling of the story. I hope you derive some benefit from it, and I wish you God's blessings. Ciao.